All right. Hello, everybody. How are you? Can everybody hear me okay? Having a little bit of trouble with computers today. So kind of let me know. Hello, Liberty or Death. I think it was just a few minutes ago that I talked to you. All right. I've got need a vote. I've got a new banner that I worked on, and I want to see which one of you guys like. So I've got two. I'm gonna play the first one and see what you guys like. And if you like it, we're going to call it number one. And if you like the second one, number two. But I would kind of like for you guys to help me pick it, so to speak. So hang on just a second. I'll play it. All right, here's the first one. Okay, that is number one. And then here goes the second one. Okay, I had a friend put those together for me. So if you like the first one, put number one. If you like the second one the best, put number two. Hey, Terry K, Happy New Year to you as well. Um, yeah, Liberty likes number one. Okay, let's see. Both of them, number one's the favorite. Okay, so far, number one. Okay, number one. So far, that's what we're looking like is number one. Yeah, I had there's a company called Fiverr that I use occasionally. A lot of the stuff you see, especially on the Friday night, I put that together myself. But sometimes when I get a little stuck creatively, I decide to let them help a little bit. It's if you're going to start a YouTube channel in 2023, you kind of got to play around with who you use, but there's some really good ones. Okay, by the vote, it looks like it's going to be number one. Fiverr is cool. Yeah, Linda, Fiverr is cool. So if you've got a presentation to do for something, or even if you just want to get some ideas on thumbnails, that kind of thing. I'm like I said, normally what you see, I do them myself, but every now and then I'll get really busy, with my actual job, and then kind of run out of some time. So we're gonna kind of get started. Hang on, I'm gonna add in some slides here. So today we are going to talk about Lucy Meadows, and this is about a child that in 1996 went missing from a local mall. And there's a little bit more to that story that we're going to get into because missing children cases are never good, they're always complicated. But this one's got a story behind it. I'm asking you to bear with me as I unpack it. Sandra said she's starting YouTube in 3023. I think she means 2023. Definitely reach out to me if you want. My email's there. Of course, you see on Twitter. There are things I learned starting a channel that I wish I had not done, and some things that I kind of wish I had done more of in the beginning. So I am going to give you a couple of different pieces of information on this case. Part of it is going to be from my own memory, and I will tell you when that is. Because as you guys know, a lot of times our memory, they say hindsight's 2020. That's actually not always true, and especially when you talk about a case from 1996. So I will tell you what is in the news media, and then I'll also tell you what I experienced at the time. But I am going to rely really heavily on a couple of articles that were in the Nashville Tennessean, which is a Nashville um, local newspaper here. And actually, there's a piece of it that they almost always get wrong. And I'm going to go over that a little while. So later in the comments, I will put the dates of the newspaper articles and link to them if you decide that you want to know. So to go back to the story of this child, and I'm going to leave her picture up for them, take it up and down depending on where I am in the story. But when you go back to the summer of 1996 in Nashville, Tennessee area, parents, including myself, I had a 4-year-old at the time, were really nervous. We had already had two little girls, similar ages, that had gone missing in the area. One in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then one closer to Middle Tennessee in Clarksville, and sadly, neither one of those girls, would make it home, and I'm not gonna give a bunch of details about that. So when a third little girl, Lucy Rebecca Meadows, was reported by her mother as missing, everybody's first thought is this number 3? Well, one of the little girls, the person that took her was actually found. The other case is still unsolved. But this case is nothing like the other 2 cases. So I'm gonna go a little bit into the background of her mom because I think it's really important, to do that to kinda know why a lot of people thought the way they thought. So, young Meadows, was her mother, and young Meadows was originally from Korea, and she moved here with her first husband. And there are 2 Tommies that we talk about through this story, and there are 2 Larrys, so I'm gonna kinda call him, Brookmeyer just to not get him confused. So she married Larry Brookmeyer. She met him, he was a soldier, and she met him at a local, um, sounds like a club. They call it a club, but I don't think it was a club as much as it was a bar. She got married to him, and that's how she got to the United States. So when Lucy was reported as missing, here's what happened. And again, this is going to be from my point of view. Um, my husband is, as I've told you guys before, is a police detective. A lot of times when I was on my way home, and that was as an extra job, he worked at the local mall, which a lot of them did, just to supplement income. A lot of times when I was on my way home, I would actually stop by for dinner, before I went home to our own kids, and we would walk around a little bit or, just depending on what the kids had going on as to how quickly I had to go home. There was a lot of times actually that I would hang out at the mall with him and I would walk around with him and see what was going on. It was a very low key job. It was one of those things that where there wasn't a whole lot to do, until, um, there's something happen. So, if you look at the news reports on the disappearance of Lucy Meadows, you're going to read, hear, and see that initially, when she was reported missing, mall security responded. That's not 100% true. So, mall security did respond in that the call did come into the mall security office. However, the officer that responded was actually my husband, who was a detective. So the police were on the scene very, very quickly. There was also another female officer that was there, and myself was there. Missing kids sounds really scary, but in the course of working at the mall, and I worked security for a little while at the mall myself, just as an extra job, missing kids were not really that unusual. It was a very busy mall at the time. It's not as busy as it used to be. It was not unusual for children to wander off from their parents, and we almost always found them. Sometimes we actually found them hiding from their parents. Sometimes we found where they had wandered out, but we always found them. When the call came in, we went outside of a store in Rivergate Mall that was at the time, known as Castner Knot. So Castner Knot is no longer there. It's no longer at the mall itself, but there was a woman in the parking lot that came and flagged us down who was not Lucy's mother, but she explained that there was a woman looking for her child. So we went up and approached Lucy's mother. Couple of things, she said, now I will say, I wanna be completely kind. Brandy, thank you for the super chat. I can't stay, just popping in to say happy New Year, Tish. I wish you a very successful year full of love, happiness, and peace. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Allegra, I found a baby under a piano when I worked at a mall at 16, quite the ordeal. Yeah, I mean, and again, people always wanna say, "Well, they're not just not watching their kids." Guys, kids can get away from you. They're smart. It only takes turning your back for just a second, especially one that young. But irregardless, when we got there, a few things you have to know. One is that the car was parked in the mall parking lot, and there are cameras on that side of the mall. And at the time, Castronaut had cameras of the whole parking lot, but it panned really slowly. You couldn't see inside the car at all. You could see the car itself, but there was a tree, and it wasn't a very big tree, but there was a tree kind of blocking the view. As soon as we got there, I'm gonna say maybe a minute or 2, it felt like longer, but, it wasn't very long. My husband got on the radio with his actual police dispatch and got helicopters in the air pretty quickly. Now, Nashville is like a lot of cities that they have different areas and different suburbs have police departments. Each of their own police departments may be very well equipped or they may be very just traffic. It just depends. But this was in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, and Goodlettsville had their own not only police department, they actually had their own detectives as well. So they were already on their way as they had already heard it from. They monitored the mall frequency, and they had heard it. So I ended up spending a lot of time with Young Meadows before everyone else got there looking for Lucy. And I want to be kind here because if I had a child missing, you don't know if you would completely fall apart. You don't know if you would completely freeze. You don't know if you would completely go blank and shut down. It's very hard to say what someone else is going to do. The second thing that I think is really important to bring up is there was a language barrier. At this point, Young Meadows had been in the United States a while, but it was still a little hard to communicate, although a lot of things she was gesturing. So she said that she let Lucy out. She opened the passenger side front door, went around to get something out of the trunk, and she went back and Lucy had disappeared. Then she said that she got out on the driver's side. Lucy came over the passenger side seat to the front seat, the passenger back seat to the front seat. She went to go get something in the trunk, and then she turned around and Lucy was gone. So either way, she was saying in a matter of just a few seconds that Lucy was there, she got something out of the trunk, and she was gone. We went inside the store, trying to look for Lucy, and again, another female security officer was there, was helping. From my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, Young wasn't really looking. She kinda just seemed very still, for lack of another way to put it. Again, could have been from shock, could have been from something else. The police got there, and the police detectives from Goodlettsville then took over from there. We kind of hung out a while, but we kind of left it. Long story short, Lucy Meadows was never found. There are people though that think that Lucy was never there. And again, as we unpack this, I want to stress, please be kind because we don't know for sure what happened. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, I know what was reported. So if you're talking about the story of Lucy, I really think it's important to go back and talk about her mother and kind of bring you to present day. So if you'll bear with me just a second, I think you'll kind of see where I'm going. So as I stated earlier, Young Meadows, her journey kind of began in 1976. She worked at a as a waitress in a club, and I'm going to butcher this, I'm afraid. It's Tog Deshawn, and it was about 30 miles outside of her home in Seoul, South Korea. There is when she met Larry Brookmeyer. He had been stationed there at Count Hovey for about a month. And while they didn't know each other's language well, they knew a little bit and they really hit it off. Long story short, the next year they were married. And of course, they moved back. She moved back with Larry and they settled in an area of Clarksville, Tennessee. So, Clarksville, Tennessee is very close to military base there. They fell into a community, really seemed like everything went well, at least for the first year or so. Larry, being in the army, got orders to go to Germany, and Young did not want to go to Germany. The reason she didn't want to go is she had applied for citizenship, and she was very worried that if she left, that would somehow put her citizenship in jeopardy. Plus, they had settled in a Korean community there. She had some friends, all of that kind of thing. By this point, they also had a daughter. Her name was Michelle. So she didn't really want to move, to another country with a child. And as a mom at that time, I can kind of understand that. Larry went on to Germany feeling like his wife would follow him, and he felt like, eventually she'd get used to that idea and she would come on, but she didn't. And in fact, she started taking her daughter Michelle, I'm sorry, her daughter Amy, mispronounced the girl's name, to his parents' house a lot and would leave her for a extended period of time. Thank you, Linda, for the memberships. I absolutely appreciate that. It means a lot to me more than you know. So after Amy was going back and forth from this is from Larry's point of view, and anytime you're looking back in a relationship, of course, what you're going to say is your point of view and how you felt about it. We don't have Young's rendition of their relationship or this married because she just didn't talk to people, and especially didn't talk to the press. But he said that just kind of out of nowhere, she decided their marriage was over and she filed for divorce. He said he did not see it coming. He actually returned from Germany to try to work it out. She just didn't want to talk to them at all. Now, by reading the newspaper accounts, it said that she left Lucy with his parents because, and this is I'm going to paraphrase, but this is actually what the newspaper says, that in Korea, if there is a divorce and someone exits the relationship in general, and I'm again saying that in air quotes in general, the father's parents step in and raise the child, and the mother doesn't see it anymore because it's too confusing and too an emotional pull. Now, I checked with one of our YouTube friends who happens to be an attorney in Korea, and he said that's not true and not as true as far as he's ever known. So, whether it was or wasn't, or again, this is just Larry's rendition, um, kind of really hard to say. But she had nothing to do with Amy at all. 0. Just completely exited her life. So, fast forward, um, she's in Clarksville, she's divorced, and she is working, again in a club as a waitress, and the owner of the establishment, was Mona Metcalf, and Mona's future husband, Larry. I told you there's a couple of Larrys and there's a couple of Tommies here. Sandra Ramirez says, I lived in Korea. I wasn't familiar with that tradition. Yeah, I haven't found anything that kind of supports that. But again, the Tennessean is the paper, and they were kind of quoting him. And I don't know if it doesn't really seem like there was a big fight or malice, but I can imagine, we're talking about at this point 75, 76. If you're trying to raise a child by yourself, it can be stressful. And not everybody is equipped to deal with a young child at home, still relatively new to the country, still limited resources. So it's really hard to judge that. I don't think I know it's something I couldn't do, and especially continue to disassociate with her. So the bar owner's husband introduced him to his partner. He had a real estate office, introduced him to the real estate office, and this man was also a teacher by the name of Tommy. So Tommy Meadows and Young hit it off, and again, just like before, they got married. So Tommy was quoted, and I will say that Tommy Meadows is unfortunately no longer with us. Um, Romero says, "Oh yes, stressful for Korean women new to this country." Yeah, absolutely. And I would think in that time frame it was even more so. Um, Louise Christine, 1976 would have been equivalently hard as a single parent. Yes, agreed. Even though she had friends in the area, again, it's I can't imagine what that would be like. Let's see what else. Okay. So we're at the point where she has met Tommy Meadows, who is Lucy's father. And according to the interview that Tommy gave to local newspapers as well as the local news, um, he- Young did bring up wanting to reunite with her daughter once, but he had actually been divorced himself. She'd been divorced. It's a new relationship. And he was a little bit hesitant to bring in a child on top of that until they were sure that they were okay. In fact, he came to Clarksville from North Carolina as a result of the ending of his marriage. And he said she didn't bring it up for quite a bit longer. So as happens a lot, you want your family with you when you're in a new country. So they started bringing over relatives from South Korea to the United States, starting with her stepfather, her mother, a step, a a 8-year-old half sister. Now, I think her name is pronounced Kyung, but she went by the name Kay Cox, and Kay is going to be really important in this story here in just a little bit. So, in fact, Tommy became Kay's guardian because she was only 8 years old. They needed to get her into school and they needed to get her resources because English wasn't her first language. And Tommy was the only one who had command of the language to do all the paperwork and deal with the school and all of that stuff. So they all, lived together for quite some while. So, from everything that everyone said, including Young's mother, Kay, her and her sister, we're talking about a significant age difference, but they got along. No problems with Kay. Kay wanted to do everything that Young wanted to do and basically wanted to be her big sister. So in 1985, they had a little boy, Tom and Lucy. I'm sorry, Young and Tommy Meadows had a little boy named Danny, and then followed by that in 1992 they had Lucy. So this happens to be the exact same year I had my son. So you can imagine, especially hearing that we have a child missing at the mall, it was every parent's worst nightmare, right? So as they go together, everything seems to be fine. And in 94, which again is about 2 years after Lucy was born, she decides she wants to reestablish ties with Amy. So Amy, just to remind you, is the daughter that she had earlier that she had ceased communication with. So at this point, Amy is now a teenager, and Amy's father, Larry, said that he was glad for her sake, and didn't want to get in the way of her mom. So Amy would have been about 16 at this point. So she never knew why her mother decided to back off from her, and they never really had a discussion about it, which today is kind of hard to think about. But back then, I can kind of see, and plus, wanting to have some type of relationship with her mother, kind of feeling like we don't want to push that too much and not push as much for answers. So everything was fine. I mean, after 13 years of no contact, they started with calling back and forth. Amy would come over on the weekends. Um, um, Amy was quoted as saying she spent as much time with her siblings, Danny and Lucy, as she could. Loved her, that Lucy would follow her around, typical of a little sister. So everything was going well until some pretty big changes started happening for Young. She started attending, after being a lifelong Buddhist, she started attending the Korean Christian church in Oak Grove, Kentucky. Now, Oak Grove is not that far from here, and not that far from where I live. I live currently. The other piece that was changing is that Young found a new friend. And again, this is a name that's kind of hard for me to pronounce, but she went by the name of Tammy Dye. So that's what we're going to call her. Tammy was an older Korean woman, and really took Young under her wing. She was also a military wife, and she had 2 adult children and 2 school-age children. Tammy's husband decided that he was gonna retire from the military and decided to do so, and in doing that, they had to find housing off base. And this piece depends on which publication you read, but basically, Tammy and her children moved in with Young and Tommy Meadows for what was supposed to be just a couple of weeks. So we're at 1994, so remember that for just a second. But for whatever reason, Tammy's husband never moved in. And in fact, they divorced pretty quickly after that. So they thought it was going to be a little while. It ended up being that they just kind of stayed up until the spring of 19. So everything seemed kind of fine until the spring of 1995 when Young's sister Kay said that there's starting to become a change and a growing chill with the relationship with her sister, as well as Young's relationship with the rest of her family. It was like she was pulling back from them. Um, Amy, who had been reunited with her mother and having regular phone calls and regular chats, all of a sudden said her mom got distant and distant and distant until one day she told her literally not to call. Amy didn't want to lose what they had built, so of course, being a teenager, right? She called anyway, just not as frequently. She would ask to talk to Danny and Lucy, and Danny and Lucy were always in trouble for something, and that's why they couldn't talk. So finally, it kind of culminated in, she didn't know, or Lucy and Danny had been bad, so they couldn't talk. Finally, though, it kind of came down to, and I'm glancing at my notes, which is why I'm looking away. She called her mother, you know, didn't know what she'd done, didn't know what she did to offend her mother, and her mother said, and this was a quote that was given at the time, "Oh, it's you. I don't want to talk to you. Bye," and hung up the phone and would not answer Amy's calls again. And Amy, by all counts, was devastated. So let's see. I was actually surprised. I was lurking, wasn't sure I could handle missing kids. It's my biggest worry with my halfling. Yeah. I completely understand that. We are not going to get into any graphic detail. I can tell you that. So there are some things I'm going to allude to, but everything's pretty, I'm going to say PG as far as the rest of the story unfolds. So there's not going to be a shock moment as far as description. So Tommy's and Young's marriage at this time was starting to unravel, and Tommy told all types of media outlets that he said that it was because of Tammy Dye. That at first he understood why Young would want to help her friend out, but it was supposed to be temporary, and that basically he wanted the woman out. In fact, to the point where they would get in constant fights about it, and he left the house essentially because Young told him to leave and not come back. So they stayed estranged for a while, um, and after a couple months after he left home, Young started trying to get back together with him. Now, something to keep in mind that during this entire time, Tommy was still paying the bills. They had a farm that they lived on. He was either staying on friends' couches, he was staying in his office. He was also a professor at Austin P. So he was staying everywhere that he could stay, basically, but he was still paying all the bills. Young wanted to reconcile, and not only did she want to reconcile, she wanted to have a vow renewal, and he wasn't quite ready for that. Number one, um, he wanted Tammy out, and that was not something that Young wanted. And then number two, he just thought that that was a little bit extreme to go from being separated to getting back together. Well, Young, from his perspective, and again, I've got to say this was just from his perspective. She has not commented on any of this, and of course, I'm sure in hindsight, it was a marriage he wasn't happy about. He was really angry at this woman, so you have to remember that in what he's saying about his comments. But he said that Young showed up at the real estate agency that he owned with Larry Metcalf, and she had had invitations printed out for their marriage renewal that he never agreed to do. And when he told her basically, "No, we're not doing this," she threw them at him in the parking lot. So from there, it kind of got more interesting, to the point where allegedly, and I want to say allegedly very strongly, young Meadows was causing problems in Tommy's life everywhere she could. She went to the university professor and tried to get him fired. She would try to essentially, it said the actual word the Tennessean used was blackmail, although it did not unpack what the blackmail was supposed to be about, Tommy's friends to get him to straighten up and sign the divorce papers. She wanted sole custody of the kids, she wanted the farm, and basically she wanted him to continue the spousal support. They went back and forth to the point to where he eventually got a restraining order that forbid her from coming either to his friends' homes, his place of business, or to the college. And that's actually a order that was actually issued by the court. And in fact, she had made some threats against him, and the judge in the restraining order said that not only did she have to stay away, she also had to surrender any weapons that were in the house to her attorney. Kind of think about that for just a second. So, whether it was she was just kind of berating people verbally or they were really very, very concerned about it, it's kind of hard to say. And I tried to pull up the order, but given the fact that it's so old, and the fact that Clarksville was a smaller town, it was really hard to find. So, Tommy never asked for the divorce. He actually didn't want it. He wanted to try to get his marriage together. So, he never countersued, but she blamed him for everything from infidelity to neglecting the kids to being a bad dad to all of this stuff. There was never anything found. So the first divorce petition was actually dismissed for lack of foundation. So the reason that this is important is because it's kind of showing a progression in we go from being a happy married to reuniting with an older child to meeting we're gonna call it a friend, to everything kind of falling apart. So at this point, we're getting closer and closer to the day that Lucy was gonna disappear. And the yeah, Sandra said, "Oh, kinda like she was stalking him." It kind of read like that, and again, feel free to read the article. It's September 22nd, 1996, in the, Tennessee and Nashville Banner. But she definitely was trying to get him to do what she wanted as far as in regards to the divorce proceedings. And so we go a little bit further. In fact, Tommy went to the point of trying to evict Tammy Dye from their home, and it didn't. He didn't really wasn't able to do that because um, Young had invited her to stay there, and she wasn't paying rent. So because she was not paying rent, she wasn't considered a tenant, so Tommy really couldn't get her out. There wasn't a lot he could do at that point. Now, on this point, Young has made comments saying that, Tammy did nothing wrong, that she was there by her invitation, that she did leave once, but that Tommy never came home, so she came back. So when we're gonna go forward a little bit to the day. Now we are in about spring of 1995 when he tried to get Tammy out of the house, and nothing worked. So several days after the hearing on the eviction case, but the eviction case was still pending. Tommy was trying to pursue it, even though he didn't feel like he could. That was still pending when Lucy disappeared. You would have thought that maybe because of the trauma that things would have improved with the family, but in fact, it didn't. It got worse. Kay, again, her younger sister, came back with their mother, to try to help and try to figure out what was going on with Lucy. Clumsy Clever writes, "Hello, my friend. Thank you for coming, a YouTube member. Really excited. She's going to be on the stream with me next week, and we'll talk about that just in a little bit. Let's see. Lady Magdala, my halfling is loving and social butterfly, but being 6 and on the spectrum, she still doesn't understand that some people really aren't that friendly. Yes. And again, Young's lack of emotion, Young's, um, I'm going to call it not quite cooperating with police, and we'll talk about that in a minute, should not be construed as her being an automatically she did something. Again, different people, different personalities. Life tends to do several different things to us. For some of us, it makes us more friendly and open and willing to talk to people. And for some, it tends to have us close back in, right? So I really don't want anyone to take what seems to be a coldness to her first daughter, the shift with her husband, all of that to mean that she's absolutely not telling the truth about what happened that day. But we're going to get to something in a few minutes, um, as to why people kind of think they weren't getting the whole story. So now we're at the point where Lucy has disappeared, and Kay and her mother and her stepfather have come. They were living in New York, came to Tennessee to try to help. But instead of wanting to talk about that, from Kay's perspective, all Young wanted to do was talk about how terrible of a mother that their mom had been, and in fact, gotten some type of physical altercation where the police had been called. Not a lot of details available about that, as in there wasn't a police report that I could find. So, at this point, Lucy's mom filed for divorce yet again, and Tommy started to make more of a petition to try to get Danny in particular. So Danny, just for remembrance, is Lucy's older brother because he got to talking to neighbors. He would talk about the kids being out in the cold. At one point, where Lucy was crying in the driveway, and were left alone at home. And in particular, there was one afternoon where a neighbor had called him because Danny was home alone, and Danny would have been, in elementary school at this point. Young said that the only time she left Danny alone was when she got called to talk to the police about Lucy and her babysitter didn't show up. So they're kind of going back and forth on the custody. Um, the judge in the case, and I cannot remember his name, it just left me, basically said that even under the circumstances that Danny was better off with his mom, but that Tommy got visitation rights. So now we're at the point where Lucy is gone. Tommy and Young are getting a divorce. Danny's staying with Tommy. They never found any evidence that Lucy was ever at the mall. The videotape again showed Young Meadows running around. The woman who had actually called into mall security to get help. It never showed Lucy at all. It never showed her exiting the car. It never showed her in the car. Again, the camera panned slow, but it did pick up her mother and it did pick up the other woman. Um, Here's where things get a little interesting, and I will say this, her attorney at the time, Mr. Hodge, had encouraged her not to talk to police, and in fact, if you get Gary Hodges was his name, he's a Clarksville attorney, and in fact, if you've seen me in streams, I've said, "Don't talk to police. Don't talk to police." So, the fact that she was giving limited details to police, again, should not be construed as being guilty, but they started zeroing in on her quite a bit when her story, of course, started falling apart. For one thing, it wasn't seconds before she started getting attention. She failed 2 polygraph tests about the incident. Again, remember though, her attorney pointed out that she English is not her first language. Incredibly distraught because her daughter's gone. It's her first nightmare. She's going through a divorce. And in his opinion, police were badgering. Now, I know that we all have different experiences with law enforcement, but I will say I happen to know the lead detective on this case, who at the time was Harry Bell. And I can tell you from my personal experience with him, he left no stone unturned trying to figure out what happened to Lucy. So Lucy never appeared from the mall. There were all kinds of things that were said at the time. There was someone who claimed in the media that um, she had tried to claim the child was missing at an earlier mall, and maybe it just didn't get the attention it was supposed to get or something. There were supposed sightings of her in different places, but nothing concrete and nothing that the police could ever prove. The sister of Lucy, Amy, did make a quote to, again, the local newspaper saying that she felt like the disappearance of her sister had something to do with gambling debts that Young had had. Nothing has ever been proven there either. They had even went to the point of searching the house searching the house, searching the farm. There was a pond on the farm that they did get a dog out to look for anything, and they found nothing. And it kind of remained that way for several years up until an interesting witness has come forward. So this information you can find out there on the Trolley Project. But so gonna try to think how to unpack this the best way you understand it because it took me a few minutes. A witness came forward in about 96 saying that they thought that they had seen her at home at least the night before. So she had been in her home the day before she was shown as disappearing. Nothing really concrete. Investigation continued, but it was kind of getting stale and kind of getting cold up until November of 2004. So in November of 2004, a gentleman came forward who is said to be a family member who at the time would have been 12 years old. He has not been identified, but from every story I found, he is considered credible. And in fact, he passed two polygraph tests. And here's what he said that the night before that he had seen Lucy and Lucy appeared to be asleep and that Lucy's mom and a lot of other people were crying, calling out her name, and quoting scripture. In hindsight, as an adult looking back, the thought process is that she was no longer in this world then. Again, this is someone who's credible. He is talked to, the police consider credible, passed some lie detector test. He started And the reason he didn't come forward earlier is because, again, as a child, it's one of those hindsight's 2020 things, right? He really thought she was asleep at the time, but now they question whether or not she actually was asleep. Sandra, I don't know if this is a factor involved, but Korean culture, children were often allowed to be unattended and left to their own devices. It was a problem on many bases I lived on. Yes, and I will say this too. When I was younger, we were by ourselves all the time. So it would be my brother, myself, my younger brother, who would have been 6 at the time. We were by ourselves all the time. So it really wasn't as much of a thing as it is now. Looking back, I remember, you know how every old person wants to say they walked home from school uphill both ways? We did walk home from school when we were in the first, third, and fourth grade. And looking back at that road, because it was basically a 4-lane highway that we crossed, I would never have my kids do it. But then there were several kids that walked home. So, um, yep, cherish this present memory, Lena wants love and support. Absolutely. So up until now, there's nothing else that has come of this. They did go to the grand jury and they did try to get a grand jury indictment, but as of right now, there's been nothing. The latest report that was done by a local news station here was done in October of this year, and they're still missing. Unfortunately, Tommy Meadows, he has died. His one biggest fear is that um, people would forget about his daughter. And I can tell you that the police department here in Goodlettsville have not forgot her. They partnered with the Montgomery County, which is where they lived, police department, and they still talk about this case. And my husband and I definitely still talk about it. Um, How many years was your husband volunteering, and what was the hardest thing he earned in that role? So Liberty, he didn't volunteer at the mall. He actually was an extra job at the mall, but he was a police officer for police officer for 32 years. He was a detective, probably about 22 of that. Did work in an area that dealt with SA, and in Tennessee and Nashville, SA for an adult was considered a 12-year-old. And about the time his daughter was 12 as well. And, that was really emotional. This is a case that kinda haunts all of us because we wonder if we gotten there a little bit earlier, would we have seen more? It's kinda hard to say. But Lucy has not been, located as of now. And the reason I bring this up is because there are so many cases out there that you hear about, in the news that keep going and going, but then there are others that kind of just disappear into the shadows. And I think it's really important for this child, for the community, for all of it to still try to bring awareness to these cold cases. In Tennessee, there are 19 children that were reported missing, and there are 19 children that are still reported missing as of the time that I last looked at the website. Let's see. Cheers to being a gift. Yes, clumsy clairvoyant is definitely a gift. I met her through another channel called The Expert. If you never caught that and you like trivia, there's a lot of trivia on Tuesday nights there, and that's kind of how we got acquainted. So that is the story of Lucy Meadows. And I do want to kind of bring something up. And we talked about this earlier, um, if you have any type of responsibility for a child, it's really important that you're able to give an accurate description, an accurate, up-to-date picture. Titian, Tennessee, hopefully, DNA advances can help solve this case. Yep, very hopeful of that. Again, get a varied from even family members on what happened, but, my personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion, I wanna stress that, I don't think she was ever at the mall. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't think she was there. I think if she'd been there as quickly as my husband got on site, as quickly as he had a helicopter in the air, as quickly as Goodlettsville police got there, somebody would have seen something. Allegra, a great topic. Is there a journal database that these children are on? Yes. The Tennessee Missing Exploited Children Bureau of Investigation still has them on. They have active missing child alerts. They have Tennessee missing children. They have active missing adults. And they also have children who now would be 18 and older. That's one of the things about a lot of like our ID kits and stuff like that. They're granted it doesn't outweigh the children who are missing that were never found, but there have been kids who they found out where they are and what happened to them based on DNA or something like that. Do you have that information for the kids' identification kits? In fact, that's where I was going next. So if you will bear with me just a second, let me share my screen. Okay. So we all in modern times think, you know, now we have all kinds of resources that we didn't have before. We've got pictures on kids on their phone. There's a couple things that kind of in my memory strike me is one, the picture of Lucy that we have is kind of an older picture. It wasn't the most recent. Now today, I have got tons of pictures of my grandkids. I've got tons of pictures of my kids, but does your babysitter have it? Does your mother have it? Does your mother-in-law have it? And do they know any identifying information at all? So Tennessee had another child that went missing by the name of Amber, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And they decided that they needed to do something because anytime a child is missing, it is really, really important to get as much information as you can as quickly as you can. So Tennessee put together what they call Tennessee Kid Kit. You do not have to live in Tennessee to use these though. Basically, it's broken down from birth to 3, ages 4 to 8, 9 to 13, 14 to 18, and senior adults or adults that need a little more help or may have something else going on that they may not be able to make it home. So I'm going to click on one of these. So I'm going to click on the 4 to 8-year-old. So basically, this is a PDF form, completely free, doesn't cost a dime to use, but it's got your child's full name, not just their nickname, because a lot of kids it took me a while to know my actual name was Letitia Michelle because I couldn't pronounce it. So that's when people started calling me Tish or Trish. So I may not have recognized that name at that age. The actual weight, height, gender, unique, any scars, tattoos, current addresses, family pets, all of the unique information about your child. What's their favorite toy? Do they have a pet? Is the pet missing? Because that can be a big thing. And a place for current photographs. The idea being that you can either print this out and have it on at the ready should you need it, or if you have a child going to stay with a grandchild, with a grandparent, or something like that, then they would have it. Because I mean, my mom, for example, she can tell you all their names, but as far as what their height, what their phone numbers, you know, any of that, she wouldn't be able to tell anybody that because she just doesn't know. So if she has something like this either on her phone or in her hand, it can kind of speed up the process to, and this is the information that the police need to know immediately when a child is missing. I'm sure other states have the same thing, but I'm presenting this one because number one, it's pretty easy, and then number two, it's free and available to anybody. Also, if you have a adult that you're taking care of, there's the same thing. So here we have silver alerts. I think that's pretty common in other countries. They call it something else. Same thing. If you're responsible for an adult that may have trouble making it home, or maybe at risk, then it has a place for, what kind of car do they drive? I can tell you what my husband drives. It's a red Jeep. I can't, I can tell you the year. I cannot tell you the license plate if I had to. So this is something even for adults. If you know that someone travels for work, for example, there are times I drive 18 hours, and if I all of a sudden disappeared, um, would my husband be able to remember everything that's on here? N- when something happens, your brain freezes on you, and a lot of people can't remember even what they knew. So the Kid Kit is definitely something that anyone can use. So if you know someone that has a child, or you know someone who has an adult, I'm gonna put the link in the description on the after this. And please share because just a few minutes of being able to remember my son got missing. It's funny in hindsight, it's not funny now. We had been at a relative's house all day. He was 7 years old. He'd been playing with his cousin who was 5. They essentially that My uncle lives in a very, very wooded area, and basically, they just got too far from the house. Like, they could see it, but they couldn't figure out how to get to it, and the more they tried to get to it, the further they went out. They had two-way radios because we always had them with the kids, but they had both radios. Long story short, he was gone about an hour, and my husband, of course, being a police officer at the time, was like, We've gotta get some help." They were spotted by an older couple driving on the interstate, and here, the interstates are cut out of these embankments that are, I don't know, 30 feet high. So they were luckily stuck on a fence because if they'd gotten over that, it could have been a tragic. We were in a different city than we lived in, and they asked where they lived and what their parents' phone number. Well, Jacob, his cousin, was from Florida, so he gave him the phone number in Florida. This was a little before everybody had a cell phone. My son said my husband works for Metro Police, thinking there's only one Metro Police, but there's several different Metro Police. So luckily, my aunt had a brother on that force and heard it come across the radio. So I mean, that was just an hour. I can't imagine. Linda Burnett, I think, Lucy, there are people that think that. There absolutely, and like I said, her sister Amy did say that she thinks it had something to do with gambling debts. I've heard that as well. But again, I don't know. I don't know. Um, yes, thank you. I am giving my personal opinions unless I said this was reported to the media, this is reported to the news stations. I will have those listed. So would you say this case is something that hunted both you and your husband, or at least lingered around? Yeah, yeah. Um, like I said, I went by the mall a lot. I worked there a little bit as a security officer, quote unquote. Said that with sarcasm, because basically it was just a way for us to walk around together while he was working. And we got all kinds of missing kid calls all the time. Everybody's like, "Just give it to Tish, she'll find them." Because I wasn't afraid to look under things, as Allegria said earlier, look under piano, right? We never not found them, and this was just it was a surreal experience. It was one where, I mean, I've been involved in things before, but had to give a very detailed statement. Um, it's haunted a lot of people. I can tell you personally, the detectives that worked on this case, we know them. And again, law enforcement is not perfect. It's full of perfectly imperfect people, but this is one that broke their hearts. And they still work on this case. It's a cold case, but they still, if anything comes up, they still take a look at it. Um, they're so blessed to have y'all in the community, so village and watchful when the worst things happen. I don't know that that's true, but I will tell you that after that, I paid more attention to kids that were separated and tried to look for one that didn't seem to be near an adult. That is something that definitely kind of got more ingrained in us, is to watch out for more kids. We were fingerprinted in kindergarten, early mid '80s. That's a piece of the When High puzzle. Yes, and that was not as much there. I will say this too. Fingerprints are great, but some people, it's very difficult. I'm one of them. When I had an armed security license, you had to get your fingerprints for them. My fingerprints are exceptionally hard to roll, to the point where I had several officers try to do it for me, ended up getting electronically done. But yeah, that can go a long way. It's very simple. You don't have to go to um, anywhere to have it done if you're worried about it being in a database. You can actually um, look on YouTube about ways to roll a kid's fingerprints. Is that why that the Amber Alert? No, no. There's another girl that was missing a lot later, in Tennessee, and that one's still not been solved. Let's see, whole puzzle for typos. Yeah, I got that. Tis in Tennessee. Whoops, I'm sorry. Do you think modern technology like cameras on a smartphone has helped to resolve the photo problem? My kids have way more photos of everything than I did. Yeah, I think it does. And I think too, had that happened now, would there have been more likely that a smartphone might have picked something up? Possibly because this was the summer. Um, the only thing is, I don't know. So, like, if I have to find something in a hurry, it still might be a little hard, but yeah, I think it goes a lot further. Um, I have my son on my iPhone app because he lives on campus in the Bronx. Wasn't happy, but understood. Yeah. I have Find My Phone on mine, where if one of my both of my boys and my husband can find me, because again, there are times for work I drive 18 hours. And for them too, for adults, you kind of our kids used to get really, really mad at us because we, even as adults, when they were living with us, we didn't care if they went out with friends. We didn't care if they decided to stay with friends, but we wanted a call to know because we wanted to know when to miss them. Right. So if all of a sudden something they didn't show up somewhere they're supposed to, we wanted to be able to pinpoint when they weren't there. And as adults, they didn't love it, but my older son now has 4 kids of his own and kind of gets it now. Let's see. Got that one. Wonder if social media helps too, since so many people share their lives from day to day. Yes, and in fact, that's something else I was going to talk about. There are internet groups. I am involved in one of them on Facebook. It's called "Bring Every Child Home," and we share information about missing kids. We don't ask questions, meaning if it's a parental issue, if it's one that is 16 and may or may not have just decided to leave on their own, we share pictures of kids, and if you are on Facebook and want to join it, there's no other than please share these responsibly. I've been surprised, and in fact, there's been some local kids that have been found. So it gives as much detail as needed without judgment, which is really cool. Yeah, even if you do know, it's better to have it written somewhere because shock sometimes makes it hard to recall the information. And that's one of the things I wanted to make sure of. I do, and I meant to say this earlier, I did offer to call Lucy's father for Young Meadows, and he told me, And I do remember this quite exactly. She said, "He has no responsibility." I don't know if that meant because she had custody of the kids. I don't know if she didn't want to get him involved. I'm not sure what that meant. But, you know, he might not have had that information, and he would have, between the two of them, might have had a little more success in communicating, just based on the language difference. Um, Snapchat locations have saved many lives. Yep. Yep, yep, yep. Um, I got that one, I'm sorry. Um, Really wonderful thing to do with the elderly or sometimes with disability, yeah. And the thing too, when you're talking about aging parents or aging spouses or aging me, right? Um, you don't know when they're gonna get to the point to where they can no longer figure out how to get home. I remember even, it was a while back, I had, of course, it involves a dog with me. One of my dogs had gotten out, and I got her down, was bringing her in the house, and when we got to the front steps, she decided to run in the house while I had the leash and wasn't ready for it. I ended up hitting my head on the frame of our door and cracking it, right? And everything went black for just a few seconds. I was like out of it for a minute and thought I was fine until 2 days later I'm on the phone with my mom, and I realized that number one, I don't know where I am. I was actually at the same mall that I'd been to for years, and I had no idea how to get home. None. So, long story short, I had a concussion that I didn't realize I had. So, even in my case, when you're talking about, somebody that's at the time a healthy younger adult, I don't think it hurts to have that information. Now, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation does suggest that you get a new one every 6 months, and with adults that you get a new one every year. But I mean, I literally had no idea how to make it home, and I knew I should know how to make it home, but I didn't know how to make it home. So things can come up all of a sudden. I think the better prepared we are, the more we up our chances in a positive result. Um, T Rox, thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying thank you. This is something that has been on my obviously mind and heart for a while. Missing kids are kind of it's always been a thing for me since then. And it only take one of the things I've learned in the group, um, Bring Every Child Home is it's one person with one piece of information that they don't know that they have that tends to turn it. It's seeing a picture and thinking, "Okay, I think I've seen this person." Right? So, you never know how far things are gonna reach. It's one of those things I said the other night on, I think it was Scott's stream where, you know, we're all just ripples in each other's ocean and don't know it. And we don't always see what that one little ripple we've caused affects somebody somewhere else. But it definitely can. Panic anxiety causes loss of memory. Yes, it can. Um, yes, tunnel vision, lack of clarity, difficulty in processing thoughts, stress, can affect so many functions. Yep, absolutely. All I said was Gabby Tito, and he understood. Yeah, I may have missed a comment, and there is something I want to say on that. So I am so thankful that Gabby Petito got the press that she got. And I am so thankful that her family knows what happened. But there were about 10 other people that were missing that they uncovered in the process of trying to locate her. There's all kinds of reasons for that, and we can debate it. We can say, well, she was pretty and young and on YouTube. We can say all the things we want to, right? But if we take just a little bit of time to slow down and look, we may be able to bring other people home. And not all of that was kids, and not all of that was accidental, and I know all of that. But they answered mysteries for a lot of families in her story. And while her story is exceptionally tragic, and I would not wish that on anyone, it just shows what we can find if we take a second to look. Yep, Bring Every Child Home on Facebook. Yeah, and I will put that in the link in the description afterwards as well. Daughter's 28 and she travels. She lets me mom stalk her with her track a friend or whatever that feature is. Yep. And I go over some mountain areas and I travel in between Tennessee and North and South Carolina quite a bit. So, yeah. Um, Rihanna, that is smart for any kid, spouse, etc. Do what you want, but let someone know where and when you are. Yeah. Let someone know when to not expect you. And if you have family members that live alone, make sure you're checking in on them. Whether they're 2 or 82, it's a good thing to kind of keep your hands on everybody. Um, Clumsy clairvoyance. I went missing for a few hours as a child. I have no memory. I was very young. While at the babysitter's house, my mom was working, and it was a truck driver who found me. Yep, yep. And I'm sorry that happened to you. It must have been terrible for your family. Completing a profile for all children and at-risk adults to keep on your phone could be great. Using those PDS as guidelines or those Tennessee Kid PDFs on your phone would be good. Yeah, and I would also, especially if you have younger children, because life gets busy, put it in your calendar. So you get like right now some Discord. I'm getting notifications, but put it in your calendar for every 6 months to update it. Kids can really change. Um, if I were to describe the granddaughter that stayed with us a while last year, it would be a totally different description from what she looks like now, because just a year makes such a difference when kids grow and change. As a toddler, I went looking for my mom while my father was laying tile. A lady found me walking down in the middle of Major Street. Somehow they figured it out where I came from, and I was returned. Yeah, I mean, my husband brought me home one day. This is before that. I'm laughing because it's not funny, but it kind of is now. One of the kids, I had come home from a major dental procedure, and he was maybe 18 months or 2 years old, and couldn't work our locks, right? So he left to go get the other one. And in the time that he left, my son decided to remove all items of clothing and exit the house. Luckily, my next door neighbor saw him, but it's really easy to judge things, but things can happen. I don't care if you're the best parent in the world or the one that doesn't pay as much attention, or you're a helicopter mom, or you're not. It, don't judge when things happen to people, because if you're not careful, you're going to be looking in the mirror on that one. Tracker on one of the patients, he had to leave it. He was running a blizzard. He's 6'5". Another would sneak out the front door quietly. Similar situation. Yep. 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 And the ripples are true. Yep. Haley Mouse, hello. No worries, I'm being late. Just glad that you're here. Um, Danielle Robinson was missing. She was that case that is the closest to my heart. Yeah, and if you want to talk about it one night on one of these streams, let me know, because, like I said, I want to do. I'm kind of doing a little bit of a pivot, so you guys are the first to know. I've actually pulled my dogs, as you saw a few of them wander in, over on a different channel all to themselves. I really want to pivot my channel into more of this type of content, as well as just mysteries and stories in general. So you'll still see them running in and out, because I can't stop them. If there's 4 of them, they outnumber me. But I want to get into more serious content. Who knows? Somebody may hear this and something click about that date. And wait a minute, I think I saw. And after this, I'm going to put in the description also who to contact in this case or in any case that you happen to see. Wonderful. You're willing to talk about something that drives trash, putting your insight experience out there. I'm sure just talking is self healing. Yeah, super self healing. Yes, it is. And the biggest reason that I worried is because what I didn't want is we all jump to conclusions based on the information that we have. But I don't want to villainize Lucy's mom in any way. Again, because we can allege a lot of things, but at the end of the day, this is a woman who no longer had her child, who had to have, a first Christmas, a first birthday, and definitely deserves some kindness. And we don't know is the reality of it. Um, I don't think she was ever there, but that's all I can tell you that I think, because I'm really not sure, and I don't want to make the judgment, and I would not want anyone to do that, because truth can be stranger than fiction, right? And there's pieces that we just don't know. And her unwillingness to continue to talk to the police, guys, I would do the same thing. I wouldn't talk. Past the point of thinking that, it was going to sometimes help bring my child home. You can talk, we've seen in Trials of the Century, we've seen on, some of the Innocence projects, one that I'm actually going to go over myself, because it happened in my hometown and happened to know some of the DAs and police officers that were involved in it, that they got it wrong. So you definitely want to have as much kindness as you want. Hey, Mouse, it happens to the best of us. It only takes questions. Yep. Um, I'd like to eat kind comments. Yeah, we try to be because again, sometimes things look obvious and it's only because there's a piece that we don't know. Let's go down a little bit. Look at Walsh. His whole life mission changed because he lost a child and helped so many find their own missing children and report suspicious activity regarding missing cases. Yeah, and I'm also working on one for Alive where there's a boy that claims that he actually is Adam Walsh, and Adam Walsh is still with us, but everything says that's not true, but it's at least interesting. Um, like a pivot, we're with you wherever you go. Really important. Thank you, Tish. Please chat. Be sure to share on social media places. Definitely will. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, got it. And objectivity is so critical in these matters. Yeah. Put yourself in their shoes, right? I mean, because again, no, the camera never caught Lucy in the parking lot, but the tree, um, so cast or not is here. The tree is here. The car's behind the tree. There is a corridor backwards that had Lucy come from the back seat to the driver's side, gotten out and gone straight, you wouldn't have seen her. And I am I don't know for certain, but I'm confident those businesses near there were canvassed. But whether or not they had cameras or not, cameras were not quite as prevalent as they are today, or if they recorded anything. So it is possible that Lucy could have climbed from the passenger back seat to the driver's side out that way when her mother was getting something out of the trunk. So it's not impossible, guys, at all, that it didn't happen exactly like Young Meadows said it. I I question it. Definitely question it. Clumsily, clairvoyant, exactly, yeah, call it empathy. All right, guys, I try to keep these as close to an hour as I can because your time is very valuable to me, and I know it's Sunday. Next week, I'm super, super excited. Clumsy Clairvoyance is coming on the channel, and we're going to talk about tarot card readings in from the perspective of, you watch it in movies, and it seems like this dark, ominous thing that it's not. So she's going to do some readings on me, and we're going to talk about how she does what she does, and some of the cards that she has is actually beautiful. So something I've been very curious about and think something about, but probably actually don't. So I'm really excited to have her on next week. All right, guys, Cat Ninja, hello and thank you. Thank you guys for the memberships. Thank you for the super chat. If you like this type of content, please leave a comment. If you have something particular you want me to cover, I'm not going to cover it from a legal perspective, meaning I'm not an attorney, although some of you know I worked in my dad's law office a lot longer than I wanted to. But this is from a curiosity standpoint, right? And from a experience standpoint, because I think the more there's always something to learn out there. I consider myself an eternal student, not an expert in much of anything. Even if we think we know something, we're one document away from history being turned on its tail, as we've seen happen many times. So, thank you guys. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Happy New Year! I know Australia is a couple of days. It's been New Year for a little bit, but wish everyone, you know, peace, prosperity, and calm because I think we all could use a little bit of calm compared to the last 3 years. Okay, guys, thank you, and like I said, enjoy. Bye.